Second family, it's a joy for me to be able to have a little bit of time this afternoon with Reverend Dr. John Koppitch. John joined us as our Director of Stewardship and Endowment in the late winter of 2011. And after 10 years of ministry here and more than 40 years of ordained ministry across the church, John is retiring at the end of this week, and I wanted to have an opportunity to have a little time with John and also for you all to hear a little bit more of his story and especially some of his experiences at Second Presbyterian Church. So John, thank you for taking some time to sit with me and for the congregation to share some of your second story.
Yeah, well, it's really my pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Well, let me just begin by saying how grateful we are. You have served this congregation so well and in so many different capacities, sort of beyond the job description. And we'll have a chance to talk a little bit about that as we go on. But I just want to start by asking, what are some of your accomplishments or sources of greatest gratitude and pride in your time at Second?
I think in general, the biggest thing is what others were able to do with the work that I did. My whole career before here was as a solo pastor or head of staff, so I was always in the front line, so to speak, and here I wasn't. That was a big adjustment until I realized that what other people were doing with the little kind of back office stuff I was doing with stewardship was having a much greater impact than I had ever had when I was a pastor. So that was the most exciting part of my job.
Yeah. Well, and I know that so much of ministry is about planting seeds and then watching the growth happen, even if you're not the one who's sort of out in front accomplishing that growth. Though in many ways, I think you've led this congregation so beautifully in theologically and biblically reflecting on stewardship and on generosity. What's your definition of stewardship, or how do you understand stewardship, especially in the context of the church?
It's taking advantage of and making good use of the gifts God has given me as an individual person, and that's gifts in a really broad sense. People who study generosity will talk about, there are a lot of different kinds of generosity, not just financial. But there's emotional generosity, there's volunteer generosity, and so that's been an important background in my thinking about stewardship. We've just come from the worship service, and so worship is on my mind, and I think about your worship leadership as one of your greatest gifts, and this is a role in which you're not up in front of the congregation every week, but you certainly make the most of every opportunity you have to lead worship, and you do so with such creativity. What does worship leadership mean to you, or how do you approach that privilege and task? Yeah, worship has always been an important part of my ministry, so I knew I was going to miss that when I came here as part of a staff, and so, yeah, I tried to take best advantage of times when I was in worship leadership. For me, let me tell a story.
Yeah.
When I did a seminary field education project, it was miserable because I had a junior high youth group that was in a small town 4-hour drive away, and I saw them 3 hours a week. What can you do with that? But I got to preach about every other month, and my first time I preached, the pastor wanted to see the sermon. Okay, I was classically trained, so at the top of the page was my single sentence proposition. And Bob looked at that and he crossed it out and he goes, "I could care less about your topic sentence." He says, "The next time you give me a sermon, I want a single sentence impact statement." Why is someone in the congregation, why is their life going to be improved, affirmed, better because of listening to your sermon? And for me, I've applied that just to worship. Okay, and in designing worship, that was always, I started with that. Okay, what's the impact I'm going for? Now, the Holy Spirit's going to do what the Holy Spirit does, but another great teacher of mine said, yeah, in worship and in preaching, we always have to rely on the Holy Spirit, but there's a difference between relying on the Holy Spirit and presuming upon the Holy Spirit. So you have to do your homework.
I love that. I love that. And certainly your homework is evident when you lead. I love the way you use language, and I love the way you tie the themes of a service together. You do that so beautifully. Well, in addition to being ordained for as long as you have been linked to a single human being for even longer, I believe. And I know that you and Judy have shared this journey of ministry together. I wonder if you would reflect on a time specifically, or just sort of the general trajectory of sharing ministry and life with Judy Woods.
Gosh. I remember when I started out in ministry. We knew each other since high school. Yeah. And when I started my career, she was waiting to do research for her doctoral dissertation. So for practical reasons, but also setting some boundaries in our relationship, she said, now I'm going to attend a church, but they're just hiring you. So they shouldn't, and you shouldn't have any kinds of expectations about my involvement in the church. So, okay, fair enough. But she got so involved in the life of the congregation, particularly with drama and theater and children's ministries, on the one hand. And then as I introduced myself to our new Presbyterian exec a couple weeks ago, and I said, oh, by the way, you should know I'm married to Judy Woods. We have different last names. And his comment was, Judy Woods, she's a legend at General Assembly. So sometimes I tease her about that. For someone who laid down the rule, don't expect me to do a whole lot in the church. She immediately skyrocketed to General Assembly responsibilities and working with the stated clerk's office. Right. And for old timers may remember Bill Thompson, who was a stated clerk for a long, long time. Judy had a administrative case here, and Bill, who's retired, asked if he could volunteer to be her second chair, which was, those who know Polity and know Bill Thompson, that was an astounding thing for him to do.
Well, she has served, again, often behind the scenes, but in some really impactful ways at every level of the church. I was thinking today about that ordination vow. I kind of structured my comments to you around the ordination questions, and there's that vow or question that says to be a colleague, a friend to your colleagues in ministry. And if there is one sort of shining example of your leadership here at Second, you have been a friend to your colleagues in ministry. And I know that's not just been true in this congregation. Really, you've been a friend and a colleague to so many across the presbytery. But as we were going back through some of the materials in your time, we came across a letter that was written April the 10th, so just about this time of year, 1990. And it reads, Dear John, congratulations on your election and call to be pastor of the Washington Street Church. You have done some amazing things with that congregation, and it's a joy to see the progress that has been made since you came to serve. Would that all of our urban congregations could be blessed with such vision and commitment. Since I will be in Chicago that Sunday, I will not be able to be there for your installation, but I wanted you to know I was thinking about you and so happy for you and the church. With every good wish, Ray Bowden. And so I think about your weaving together so many lives, not only at Second, but sort of across the presbytery. And I wonder if you could say a word or two about what friendship has meant to you in the church.
Well, let me start with Ray.
Yes.
When he came back to the presbytery, there were a couple of us that were trying to get presbytery to put together an urban ministry strategy. And so when Ray came, we immediately glommed onto him with his expertise and knowledge. And so his friendship for me around urban issues goes way back, even preceding that letter. Oh boy, talk about a friend in ministry.
Yes.
Ministry is a partnership. I don't know if I'd use the word friend. That wouldn't be the first one that would come to me, but it's very important to realize, we're all in this together. And we have ordained elders and deacons and ministers, but that separation is by function only. It's not a hierarchical thing. one of the best compliments I got was at my going away dinner from my previous church. One of the elders said, "You know how much John loves football?" "Yeah." And he goes, "Do you know whose jersey he wears?" And most people didn't. And he goes, "He doesn't wear Peyton Manning's jersey. He wears Jeff Saturday's jersey." Because he's the center. He's not the star. He's not the one throwing or catching touchdown passes. Right. He just does his job with everybody around him as colleagues, my dad would say, as a team.
Yes. Yeah.
My dad was a coach, and he impressed upon us, success is measured not by individual accomplishments, but by how well your team does.
Oh, that's beautiful. You use the phrase "all in this together," and of course that's a phrase we've heard a lot over the last year as we've thought about life in, and now hopefully we're both vaccinated and able to have this conversation. Now maybe seeing that light at the end of the tunnel. I wonder if, obviously your last 15 months of ministry at Second are unlike any that you could have imagined. I wonder if you could reflect for a moment on how you feel Second has responded, particularly in the area of commitment and generosity in this pandemic year.
Yeah, this has been an astounding year. Sometimes I've told people, I should have retired 2 years ago and I would have missed all this, in jest. Reflecting back on it, I am really overjoyed that I was able to experience this difficult time in this congregation, because the demonstrated resilience, creativity, oh my gosh, and I would say dogged determinism. No matter what's going on, we've got a mission, and by golly, we're going to find a way, even in the pandemic, to be a welcoming community through which Christ can transform lives. That's been inspiring for me, and so I end my professional ministry on a real high note, grateful for having been with this congregation through that. Well,
and you've been a key part. I'm sure glad you didn't retire 2 years ago, because you've been a key part of, and such a wonderful supporter of the whole staff. And I know there were many Sundays when you were the lone person in the pews who was not participating in worship, but there to support those who were leading, and I give thanks for that. So turning our lens maybe to the future, as you retire from Second, I want to ask both a Second question and a John question.
Okay.
So what are your hopes for this congregation as you retire?
My hopes are boundless, because we came through, I think in many respects, we came through the pandemic stronger as a church. Gosh, we've learned so many new skills, and we've learned so many new ways to do ministry, whether it's pastoral care, worship, Christian education. And we did all that just on the fly, having to create the airplane while we're flying it. Now that we'll have some time to reflect on what we've done and to be kind of more intentional and thoughtful, going, wow, that's going to be powerful. And in terms of stewardship, I'm so happy to have had this job through the pandemic at a time when there are all kinds of different ways people can share their financial resources for the ministry of the church. And man, did our congregation pivot quickly to doing online giving and finding other creative ways to support the church without being able to physically be here to put their offering in the offering plate.
Right. And I may know the answer to this last question. I think it may take the form of some human beings, but what are your hopes for retirement and this next chapter of your life?
Okay. Yeah. The first thing is I'm really tired. I'm 70 years old, and it's time to move on. So the first thing is I'm not going to do a whole lot of anything. But Judy and I have always traveled a lot, and so we're looking forward to that. And now our family is getting old enough now that we've always wanted to take our whole family on trips. So we know where the first 2 trips are going to be. When that'll happen will be a couple of years. And then in particular, we have made a commitment to each of our grandchildren that when they turn 10, they get to go on a trip with the grandma and grandpa somewhere. Okay, well, Lila's birthday, 9th birthday, was in February, and so we reminded her of that. And the first place she said, where do you want to go? First thing she said was Hawaii. Well, that's because they had a family trip planned to Hawaii that got canceled by the pandemic. So our response was, well, that would be great, but we only have a weekend, so we don't want to spend our whole time in the airplane. And so this is a 9-year-old, okay, and she goes, well, I've heard New York a lot. I don't know what's there, but certainly you hear its name a lot. And I'm sitting here, and she's
great.
pondering, thinking, this is exactly the kind of reaction we're looking forward to. So our plan with her is, well, you got to read up on New York. We'll figure out where to go.
Reminds me that I think that Jeff Saturday jersey of yours became a VBS T-shirt on a yearly basis. One of my favorite stories is how you were an every year volunteer for Vacation Bible School, and that your commitment to whoever was leading that was just plug me in where you need me, and I will serve. And in so many ways, John, you have been exactly that glue that has held this staff team together, that mentor to so many of our younger staff and pastors, a friend among your colleagues in ministry. And so I give you the words of Jesus, well done, good and faithful servant, well done. And we give thanks for your ministry and look forward to staying in touch with you. So glad you'll still be a neighbor and friend of our church.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.